The Founder is the true story centering around McDonald's and its origins and its founder, Ray Kroc. It's directed by John Lee Hancock, who also directed Saving Mr. Banks, and stars Michael Keaton. So, there is some concern going into a movie like this, as it was originally set to come out in August, and then pushed to December. Many people thought for award season, but then pushed to an unusually kind of late January release, sort of putting it out of contention for that award season almost. So people were a little weirded out, including myself, going into this. For those of you that don't know, it was supposed to come out the same weekend Suicide Squad came out over the summer. So I was a little skeptical going into this movie, but overall, I came out very pleased. Let me get into what I didn't like about the movie, which, because it's the first thing I noticed, it's really the first 10 to 15 to 20 minutes of this movie. You get off to a very rocky start, and it's more so because of the exposition. It's just so spoon-fed to you. There are lines in this thing that are so ridiculous, like, in terms of blatant setup, and it's kind of annoying. It's like, okay, I, as an audience member, could have figured that out for myself. It just really feels like kind of poor screenwriting, and it gets you a little worried for what the rest of the movie is going to look like. But it does actually very much regain its balance and sort of become a very well balanced and flowed movie. Because that's one thing I actually noticed about this is, despite the fact that it is quick in pace, which I'll get into a little later, this movie flows very nicely, and it's just one very simple experience that you actually become very invested into. One of those things that actually really brings you into this movie is its dynamic, and you're sort of battling back and forth with yourself as to whether you want to like Ray Kroc or if you want to dislike Ray Kroc, because he does things as a character and through the screenplay that would make you want to like him and say, oh, okay, he's a nice guy, he has the best intentions at heart, but then there are also times where you're like, wow, that came out of nowhere, and that's not the right thing to do, and that's sort of just, like, it's overall, he becomes, as time goes on, more and more of a greedy person, and more of someone you're not supposed to like, but you're still battling with yourself as to whether or not you really do feel for this character, and you want this character to succeed, and he does. I assume most people would know that, because it's a movie about McDonald's, and you can't drive 10 miles without finding a McDonald's, so you know, that actually does kind of help with this movie in terms of you don't know if you want to be rooting for him or not, despite the fact that you know what's going to happen. As a character, you don't know what you want from him, and I think that's not only complemented by the screenplay, it's also complemented by Michael Keaton's performance. Michael Keaton has finally cemented himself again as a great actor. We knew okay, I shouldn't say we, because if you can't tell, I was not around in the 80s and 90s. But in the 80s and early 90s, he was a great actor. You look at Beetlejuice and even Batman. People still praise him for being Batman, despite the fact that, in my eyes, you watch that movie, those two movies again, they don't hold up too well. Specifically, his Bruce Wayne Batman. I mean, come on. I get that he was, like, the first film Batman, but, like, you know, and he was once a great actor, but he had that falling off point, and now he's risen himself back up again. Birdman was his start, and I stand by, despite the fact that I'm not a huge fan of that movie, he should have won the Oscar for that. And now with movies like Spotlight, and now this, next year he's got the Spider-Man movie coming out where he's playing the villain, he's really cemented himself as a great actor again. And this movie very much helps with that, as he does portray that you don't necessarily know if you want to like him or hate him. I kind of look at it as similar to Fences, but not so much like Fences with Denzel Washington's performance. You don't know if you want to like him or hate him. I think in Fences it was a little more due to the screenplay. In this one, I would lean it a little more towards Michael Keaton's performance and what he does with him and the mannerisms that he comes up with him and just sort of how he portrays the character overall and his emotions and his way of interacting with other characters. But not just Michael Keaton does a great job. All of the performances in this movie are great. You've got Nick Offerman, you've got John Carroll Lynch, you've got Laura Dern, you've got even Patrick Wilson and B.J. Novak, despite the fact that they're not huge parts. They're, you know, relatively large names. A lot of people might not know them by name, but if you see them, you know, oh, it's the guy from Insidious, and oh, it's the guy from The Office. You know, you'll notice them. They're all great in this movie, especially I kind of noticed with Nick Offerman, who people know from Parks and Rec. And I've seen Parks and Rec, and he's great, and he's very funny, but this is a very different role for him, something I didn't really expect to see from him, and he does a great job, but the entire cast really does, because they are supporting characters, because this is Michael Keaton's movie, and they have to do that job of supporting, and they all do it spectacularly. Another one I could point to is Laura Dern, who is very much, similarly to us, battling whether or not we like this character or dislike him, and what she wants to do as Ray Kroc as her husband with this situation, because while on the surface it would seem like a great situation for people like that, it might not always be. Look, I'm getting a phone call. That's very professional of me. So, you have to look at that, and I think that's very important in terms of judging performances. I kind of touched on, the screenplay gets better. It's off to a rocky start, but as time goes on, like I said, it flows more and more. The directing was great. Some of the sequences in this movie, they're very, very well directed, and looking at a movie like Saving Mr. Banks, which, I forget the guy's name for some reason, it's very, very well done, and I think, just like, I don't know if this was intentional when they made the movie. If it was, major kudos to them. This movie is very quickly paced, and if it was done intentionally, because like McDonald's pumps shit out quickly, I don't know if that was intentional. If it was, round of applause. But it was something I very much noticed. Like, in terms of how scenes are structured and how dialogue is, it's very fast and very quick. And it's kind of cool, actually. I sort of liked that. Dialogue is it feels almost like an Aaron Sorkin movie, not as political or even as intelligent as an Aaron Sorkin movie. It's that ping pong dialogue. It's that real quick going back and forth, going back and forth, going back and forth. And scenes too is sort of okay, scene. It's all moving very rapid fire, but as you sort of move more into this movie and as Michael Keaton becomes more of a dislikable character, it starts to slow down a little bit, and scenes become a little more dragged out, and conversations become a little more dragged out than they were towards the beginning of this movie. And that, if that was intentional, that's excellent. And I think that's very much also complemented by the editing. The editing in this movie is great. The way they piece everything together, and they even do some kinds of flashbacks. I thought that was all very well done. The editing is great, and it very much helps the pacing of this film, which I think is a very big part of why it ends up working. And finally, I think a big thing about this, when you make a movie like this, especially a true story, just in general, it has to be intriguing, and it has to be interesting, and it has to just grab your attention. And this movie does that through multiple different fashions, like I've talked about. Like the characters and the pacing of this movie really helps to bring you into the situation and go, you know, I've eaten at a McDonald's before, because if you say you never have, you're probably lying to everyone around you and yourself. And if you haven't, fucking bravo, because good on you. But like, most people, you know what McDonald's is, but they don't necessarily know the story behind that, and so it has to be interesting enough to where you're pulled into it, and they do a great job with that. They take something that most everyday people will know, and they put a very interesting and intriguing story behind it that puts you in the shoes of these characters, and what would I do? That's what really sets this movie aside from many different others. So, overall, I very much enjoyed this movie. I got a very good experience out of it, and actually, I've learned a lot about the history of one of the most successful franchises in not just America, but you've seen it, a Royale with cheese. It's everywhere. So, despite the fact that it gets off to a rocky start and has some script issues in terms of, I would say, cheesiness and corniness every now and then, this movie comes out on top for me. As a quality movie, I would give The Founder an 8 out of 10. I do recommend seeing it. I recommend checking it out. The theater was fucking packed, which I was very surprised by, but it's cool to see movies like this get a lot of attention, because I wouldn't call this an indie movie, but it's nice to see something that isn't Batman v Superman of a packed theater. So, what did you guys think? Have you seen The Founder? Have you not seen The Founder? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you all next time.